is we're going to go into a bit of a panel session. So we're going to bring all of our lovely speakers who have managed to stick around with us after their talks this morning, which hopefully you will agree were absolutely fabulous. And actually we've had lots of people sharing the link to the YouTube, which is being live streamed at the moment, saying, hey, you've got to listen to this talk, etc. So Lucy, I know that there are people in the lithium world who haven't spoken to you in a while, who are reaching out, etc., together with some of the others as well. And Grant as well, lots of people picking up on a load of the ideas and what approaches that you're using already and saying, hey, can they be applied in a load of different areas? Now, just to tee up this panel session, what I'm going to do is open the floor to questions to come in from our attendees, both on Zoom, on YouTube, and anybody else who happens to be out there as well. Please send those questions through to us, either through the channels that are at your fingertips or to our email address at hello@responsiblerawmaterials.com. So please send them through to us, and Rose will wave at me as and when they arrive. But to get us started and to try and consolidate, I guess, some of what we've been hearing over this week, I'm going to unashamedly just read out one of the emails that has come in over the last hour. And this comes from Christian Mazarenko, who is currently sitting in Germany, but unfortunately can't speak to us live because he's on a call with his team in Nigeria. See, that's what happens in this COVID world at the moment. Christian is from EC Terra, so I'm sure some of you know Christian. And it is a fairly lengthy email, but bear with, and we've already listened to the dulcet tones of Mark Krakavides, so I shall attempt to emulate Mark in his beautiful speaking style. Yes, no, you don't need to frown at me, Mark. You can smile and take that as a compliment. So Christian says, hi, I'm listening with great interest to my colleagues here in your online conference. Fantastic topics and talks, and so great that you put this together. Thank you very much, Christian. We will take that as a compliment. I should also say, by the way, to our panelists, I'm going to come to you at the end of this for your comments on what Chris has written to us, and also your ideas as to how we can take this to the next step. He goes on to say, I can see that we all have the idea of making the mining world a better place, better social and community relations, better stakeholder engagement, more transparency, more traceability of raw materials, responsible mining, better corporate responsibility, better communication, and so on, ... The question that drives me crazy is, when and how the heck do we start to implement all that quickly before things go upside down in such a climate? Wars on raw materials, social and environmental impact, question mark, question mark, question mark. While a lot of other industries manage to get their certificates and traceability in their business, we as miners are not able to implement a standard for certification of raw materials and can't get transparency in our streams of raw materials. I should add that I suspect there is a yet in there in brackets. We do fantastic research, we have all the tools, but we can't get them to implement or haven't managed to get them to be implemented over decades. And trust me, I see that since decades I was involved in talks and projects, and I can't see any fast development through all of the ideas and tools in front of us. Why is this? We talk to one another and we all say, yes, we're right, we need to do something. And then very little happens, just lots and lots of talks. He doesn't want to throw that into the conference here since he doesn't want to disturb the fantastic talks. So note, he's not having a go at us for speaking to one another. We need to get out and do things together, coordinated and better connected with more communication. The world does need more raw materials, though we may be changing our view on environment, consuming goods, renewable energy, recycling, etc. There are many, many studies from all of the geological surveys around the world that say the same thing. More raw materials and a shift in the type of raw materials is what we are looking for. And we're even looking into mining subsea, for example, as Richard Harrington was talking about yesterday with regards to cobalt and manganese. So when do we get smart? The gap between consultants wanting to install the highest standards and companies doing extraction gets wider and wider, and the problems get bigger and bigger. More nations do not want mining in their country, and rather prefer getting their raw materials from somewhere where they don't see how it is done. I can go on and on. Why can't we as miners not get together and make a cut, a change right now, and get more transparency, even if it's not perfect in the beginning? Honestly, it might sound like I'm having a midlife crisis. I'm not. I just see how it works in our business. The level of rubbishness since Bre-X is now and again at a new height, but it's much more sophisticated in the case of hiding the truth, and partly the problem of how the codes, for example, or the reporting of the resources and the reserves, be it JORC, PERC, etc., are used, or how they are monitored. Anyway, since I'm following this conference over the last few days, and I can see so many people working on many different useful items, this happens to be my 5th conference over the past 12 months, and brilliant people all over the planet are reporting their work. And then you see at every conference that others don't know about this work and have no idea of what's going on elsewhere in the world and how advanced different areas are. So I would say we need something more than conferences. We need to bring all these fantastic people together, combine them with core people from politics, industry, environmental agencies, NGOs, social managers, recycling groups, science, etc., and create a super intelligence group service cloud with state-of-the-art database behind all of that, with artificial intelligence, data mining, etc., and become something like the Google, Apple, CIA, UN, you name it, for raw materials. That way we could save some time. And I really don't know how much longer we can go on with what we're currently doing. Everybody has been surprised by the scale of the impact of COVID-19 to the world. What do you think happens when we additionally add some very nasty viruses that we have to the planet's environment changing rapidly because of the turning points of environmental impact have been passed? So here, of course, I think he's referring to climate change. I hope we can stay in these discussions and chat with regards to this. Where is the action and how can we make all of this happen? So I think, having unashamedly stolen Chris's email there as a whole, I think he is really encapsulating some of those feelings, etc., that we have inside ourselves. And I'm looking at the faces of our beautiful panelists now to see who wants me to come to them first. They're all looking in the sky and whistling. So Mark, maybe if I can perhaps come to yourself first, and then we'll go to Chris. So Mark, what are your thoughts with regards to Christian's email?
Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Sarah. I think I agree with more or less everything he says. We contend with these issues daily. I suppose a very straightforward answer to his multi-layered question is, what we need to do is go from using the word mine to the word ours. And I think what we need to do is show by example, and by very simple, concrete example, delivery of not only economic value, but change and benefit. And in other words, change the equation of what we do. I think he's right. But I think we can't do that on a massive scale. I think in today's world, we will be swimming against the tide. I think we have to be honest about it. We're looking at a world where people will grab for resources. We're looking at a world where population growth in particular areas is going to be enormous. It is already enormous. We're looking at simple demand and supply issues. So what do we do, the people in the room today? What we have to do is work on very specific examples. And for example, in Europe, which is one of the very few things I know about, that has to be greening, it has to be electrification, it has to be renewable energy, it has to be a fundamental technological change, producing and using lots of lithium, keeping Lucy's pension going, and but realistically doing something concrete in a very small area. I think we need to demonstrate examples that people can touch and feel and see and not be afraid of. So change mine to ours.
Thank you for that, Mark. Brilliant. Chris, should we come to you next, if you want to take yourself off mute, and then we'll go to Lucy.
Yeah, very, very quickly, I guess. Having worked in climate change for over a decade now, and originally in the steel industry, I have to admit that at the end of 2019, I thought, okay, this has all changed. From now on, we're going to see massive environmental improvements. And and I think that the very simple to answer to Christian's question is you have to hit the wallet. You know, we can be, you know, as conscientious as we want, you know, and we can extol the green virtues of mining as much as we want. If the stuff that we're producing is more expensive than the stuff across the other side of the water, then the manufacturers are going to choose that, unless they're responsible, or unless they can get you know, added value from the products that they then produce later on. So the sea change within the climate action sphere has been trading schemes, negatively impacting people that emit more, positively impacting people that take, you know, large strategic action to change or to reduce their emissions. And really, I think that unless, you know, we realize that, you know, despite being environmentalists, you know, we are kind of socialists in a way, despite our kind of personal approach, we do live in a consumer-driven world. And unless we hit the wallet, unless it's, you know, the money is there for being more ethical, or or the opposite for being less ethical, then I don't think we're going to, you know, necessarily see that change. But we have the models, the emissions trading scheme has done just that. So, you know, what we need to do is replicate something of that ilk across the whole spectrum.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. As you say, we've got those models. Let's actually replicate them and show where we can really get them to work elsewhere as well. Awesome. Lucy, should we come to you next, and then we'll go to Grant?
Wonderful. Yeah, well, what a great email. I think that does encapsulate a lot of the conversations that we've had today. And just to build on what Mark and Chris have just said, you know, I think it's great that there are all of these schemes out here, and it did really feel at the end of 2019 that, you know, climate is on people's agendas now, whereas it hasn't been such a part of the public conversation, arguably even 2 or 3 years ago. So I think the last 12 months has made a significant impact on bringing that into people's, you know, into people's psyche. But how do we actually change the industry? That's a much bigger question. And I suppose it comes down to, how do we value these mineral deposits? There's kind of 2 prongs. One, at the moment, resources and reserves, yes, they build ESG into it to a certain degree, but actually at the end of the day, it's kind of the project economics that determined whether a project's actually going to be developed or not. And I know that there are lots of conversations happening about, can we actually build in these ESG metrics to give them some economic tangible value? But I think the other thing that we need to consider as an industry is there are some people doing fantastic things in the mining and extractives industry. They're doing things really responsibly. Chris mentioned they're not going to, I don't think people are going to pay a premium for it. So maybe we need to address this big disconnect that seems to exist in society with what consumers are using and where it's actually coming from. And, you know, it's when we get this consumer driven demand, I think that's going to make a real difference. And so maybe the first place to start is with, you know, the big investors who are financing these big extraction projects. People are really starting to look at ESG metrics now and build them into their investment decisions. But until, you know, someone's not going to invest in a mine that's going to have a really significant environmental impact, or it's got a coal-powered processing plant, I think until that changes, maybe that's the first place to start. Maybe that's going to have the biggest impact. Go for the wallet, as Chris said.
Great, thanks, Lucy. Grant, I know that you wanted to add into this conversation, so we'll come to you next.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's a great question by Christian, and you can absolutely feel the frustration that comes from it. And so, look, I'll start with this: the technology that we have can eradicate blood diamonds from the supply chain. It existed 20 years ago. It just hasn't been adopted. And it's not just around eradicating blood diamonds out of a supply chain. It's around forcing those countries where that occurs to come back to the market and undertake responsible mining so that they can share the prosperity with the communities in which those diamonds are from. So I get his frustration. So we believe the answer to the question is, you can't solve the entire industry. What we need to do is to focus on one supply chain at a time, an integrated supply chain, even if that's with three mines, one refiner, into a product that goes into an OEM or a consumer-facing brand. And if we can solve it for one supply chain, and the technology or the services that are applied to make that a transparent supply chain has to be scalable and it has to be cost-effective. Once we've provided a solution, then it's very difficult for consumer-facing companies and large listed companies to then make these outrageous claims around their ESG commitments. And I've read the financial statements, and we've got intricate insight into some of these companies. So we know that, you know, simply having these ESG claims and then a picture of a school in Africa that you've sent money to doesn't get away from the fact they have no idea where their products are coming from. And some of them, sometimes it's not their fault. They simply cannot get a line of sight to enough supply to lock in their commitments around 100% ethically sourced material. So if you can't get 100%, they tend to stop digging and looking for it. So the more that we secure integrated supply chains that are transparent, and no one expects perfection in a transparent supply chain when you're procuring that from an African country, but transparency provides some level of forgiveness because we have different standards and expectation that those countries will get an economic development benefit from that process. So that long-winded answer, absolutely get his frustration. I think we focus on the integrated parts of the supply chain who do care, who are passionate about this. We solve it for them, we prove it up economically, and at that time, the consumer-facing brands will then switch out from their current suppliers to these suppliers. And to your point, Lucy, they may not pay a premium for it, but they will actively choose it over a competitor. And so I think that's where I think the start of a very complex solution starts.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very, very much for that, Grant. And I think, as you say, it's been done before, so we can move in a very logical manner through some of those other commodities, etc., some of those other value chains, because it is a big beast to be able to try and eat all at once. Ivy, I'm going to come to yourself, and then we'll go to Emma for her thoughts as well. So over to you, Ivy.
Thanks, Sarah. I think at the risk of possibly sounding like Southern Hemisphere groupthink, totally agree with Grant. It comes down to the perfect system can be created and perfect accountability and transparency can be achieved if someone can be convinced to pay for it. But because that cost is so impossibly high, we have to instead settle for what works best. And in that sense, what works best is potentially this combination of the good companies sticking to best practice and demonstrating that good practice is worth following, also then combined with support from consumers of all, right from the end consumer to the companies and so on, recognizing that there is value. There may not be solid, tangible monetary value, but there is societal and feel-good value attached to doing the right thing. So then this collective cost is looked at, and this is where the ESG consideration is important. That ESG is not just a fluffy bunny tree-hugging thing. It's a tangible improvement in the total overall human condition, and that is worth a lot. But we need to have more people recognize that and to pursue it and to agree to sacrifice certain monetary profits in that exchange. So perhaps we are living in a slightly smaller house, driving a slightly less flash car, but in return, we actually have a better environment, and we know that people will be starving less because we are not exploiting a workforce in another country to produce my next iPhone. So it's always back to the money. And this push by the superannuation funds and the instos is a great thing because they can help change this equation.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much for that, Ivy. That's fantastic. Emma, we're now going to come to yourself for your thoughts.
Sure. I think I agree mostly with what the previous panelists have said, and they've all said it very eloquently. Regarding Chris's question, I think he really does capture, I think, almost maybe what you were thinking about when you were designing this conference, trying to bring different people from different people who have different approaches to geosciences and to mining and responsible raw materials, trying to bring all those people together. So while, yes, conferences probably aren't enough, it is a really good platform with which we can actually begin to talk to people outside our own disciplines. I think also what Grant was saying, you know, these initiatives do exist, and there's also the EITI, so the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, and that has, I won't say struggled, but it has definitely been a great challenge to try and get all the various countries to get involved. And there's that, and there's also, I know, so I work at a survey, and we do have an awful lot of discussion with all the other surveys, and those big databases that Chris was talking about, a lot of them do exist. And actually I think as geoscientists, we have a great responsibility to explain the data we have and to share that data perhaps more clearly, because you know, it does exist and those big databases are there, and perhaps that the onus is on the geoscientists as well to communicate that data and those initiatives more clearly. I do think though it comes down to the cash dollar. That is the real crux of it, is money. And I have to say I completely agree with Ivy. As individuals, well, as geoscientists, we need to explain to our community and perhaps to encourage a bit more empathy. You know, it's all very well, as Grant said, showing a picture of a school, but really understanding where people are coming from, and explaining that the potential damage from having an upgraded iPhone, and other phones exist, but you know, having such a throwaway culture with those sort of things is really damaging to the environment. And I think perhaps we need to communicate that better. So I would go with we're trying, and it's difficult, but yeah, the wallet is where we're really going to be able to make the difference, I think.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emma. I'm just going to hop across to Ruth now, and then Ludovín's going to help me sum up. I know that there are still questions coming in here, so what I would encourage is for people to log back in again this afternoon, because this discussion is going to carry on, and I know that we're slightly over time this morning, but I think that this discussion is worth it. And Ruth, just before we come into yourself, yes, it's about where are the levers, or where are the drivers that are actually going to make a difference. There's the money side, there's also to an extent that regulation side as well, so the permission to be able to do what we do. The rock is in the ground, and the technology, yes, we can change in terms of being able to get that rock out of the ground and through that supply chain, but having worked as a geologist and also in the world of sustainability, I 100% agree with what you guys are saying. Unless we can change that pool with regards to where the cash is coming from and what it's doing, it's very, very difficult to change everything else within the whole spectrum of the marketplace. Ruth, across to your wonderful self.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the word trust in terms of the way we interact with wider society. And to say that on a project by project, issue by issue basis, you have to start at the beginning. I find it not a problem at all talking to people outside the industry to explain to them that if it can't be grown, it has to be mined, for them to understand where things come from in the things they consume. People are absolutely persuaded of that, easily persuaded of that, even though they hadn't thought of it themselves. But when it comes down to you, your family, a country you care about, and an actual project, there is no substitute for human-to-human contact. And I also think it's good business for us to attend to these non-technical, non-financial issues. If we don't do it, we have disasters and we lose a lot of money. So actually, why wouldn't we?
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Ruth. And finally, to help me to sum up this lovely session from this morning, across to France and to Ludovine, who has been gleefully taking notes all morning to be able to provide us with our summary blog.
Thanks. Thanks to all the panelists, and these talks have been amazing. And I think one of the points that came across every single one of these talks, as well as a lot of the comments that I've been tracking and a lot of your closing up remarks just now, is the notion that there's a lot of initiatives, they all strive for some leverage, and it's complex to see how this leverage can be best implemented to achieve change. And one thing that really struck me is that at the heart of all of these initiatives, whether we're talking about policy, about usage-driven, or about investment and money-driven initiatives, there is one common thread, and that's us. Every single one of us is the constituent that votes for policy. Every single one of us is a consumer that votes with our own wallet, and every single one of us has savings, I hope. And as such, we are the ultimate drivers of how the investment community acts. And I don't know if you remember, a few months ago, there was a huge amount of enthusiasm for a very famous asset manager that came out with a very important investor letter. And the conclusion was, we will be increasingly disposed to vote against management and board directors when companies are not making sufficient progress on sustainability-related disclosures and the practices and plans underlying them. And I think what we need to all look at is we can no longer be that enthusiastic about such tame language. We are the ones saving. So when the universal savings organizations that represent us say to asset managers, no, you don't understand, increasingly disposed was 3 years ago, we need you to vote now as shareholders, then that's how we affect change. But ultimately, a lot of this comes down to individual behavior. So I think it's worth just reminding ourselves that we hold every single key to this as a constituent when we vote, as a consumer, and as a saver. So a lot of the discussion today has hinged on the cost and the value creation. The reality is, if we look at ourselves as all three of these qualities in one, we are all paying at some point, and we will all benefit at some point. So I think by integrating this view, effectively, the whole cost and value issue drops away, because the reality is, it's just a placement in time. Every single one of us will pay, and every single one of us will benefit. Will we pay as consumers because we buy, maybe our next phone a little bit more expensive because we're not accepting conflict source minerals? Probably. But we'll also benefit because ultimately we're reducing political risk and the impact that it has globally. So I think we need to look at this in a more integrated way and stop looking at it like it's trade-off. It's actually happening to every single one of us, and we are acting on it in every single action. So that was my little input.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Ludovine. And thank you also to all of the fantastic panelists and speakers that we have here. And thank you also, Chris, to making that panel much easier than we thought it was potentially going to be by sending through that email. So I think, in summary, do we have all of the answers? No, we don't. But we've certainly got lots of ideas with regards to the direction that we could take. As Emma quite rightly says, one of the reasons why Rose and myself and the rest of the team put together this conference was to try and break down some of those silos, was to try and create the safe space, as Ruth was saying, for people to be able to engage and ask questions and to learn from one another. And I think that that's something that actually the online environment provides, that face-to-face conferences don't. We can see from the different streams of the way that people are communicating with one another at the moment, it's absolutely fantastic and fabulous in the way that people are communicating and speaking to people that they would never normally encounter in everyday life. And as you guys quite rightly say, it's that creation of that empathy so that we can really get that feeling of ours, not mine, in the words of Mark, And one thing that I guess that COVID has given us is that we are one community on our very little rock flying through space. So actually that sense of ours rather than us and them, we are all one team together. So how do we make sure that we see everything in its entirety, its complex entirety, but how do we actually see that going forwards? So with that, ladies and gentlemen, it pains me to say that that is the end of this morning's session. But don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, because we have this afternoon and tomorrow morning sessions still to go. So there are 2 more sessions of this. As I mentioned, everything has been recorded. And so alongside all of those abstracts, all of these talks are being left online, unless of course our speakers get in touch to say, no, I don't want my stuff to be left up there. And of course, we're not going to put you through that pain of leaving things online if you don't want it. But it is there as a resource in whichever way you want to interpret that. What we have been saying to everyone as well is if you feel that you've missed out on this conference, if you think that we should run another one at some point in time in the future, please let us know and suggest names of people that you think would be really good to speak. Mark's there going, yes, please. Oh dear, Rose, you're never going to finish that PhD. But also as well, if people have talks, etc., that they would like us to include on the website, send them through. We're not affiliated with anybody. We're not representing anybody. I think we're representing us and ours as a whole. At least that's what we're trying to create, is this collaboration across the community as a whole. So please feel free to send through all of your ideas and we'll see what we can do to make them happen. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, as I always say, we have a phenomenal session lined up this afternoon. Ivy's laughing at me. Apologies for the timing for you guys in Australia. This afternoon session, of course, time zone wise, is designed for those people in the Americas who have been fast asleep during this morning session. But of course, you can catch up online later. Just by way of advertising, it is jam-packed this afternoon because we have slotted in some extra talks, haven't we, Rose? Because people were so desperate to get involved at the last moment, which is brilliant. And we're more than open to people doing that. So we kick off at 3 o'clock with Nicholas Arndt, who's going to be talking about metal supply and demand with regards to COVID-19. So another COVID-themed talk. And then we're going to go to Joel Gill for Geology for Global Development, and he's going to speak about responsibility-driven earth scientists, initiatives from the classroom to the United Nations. Then Rob Pell, who was mentioned earlier on by Lucy, is going to talk to us about harmonizing environmental performance calculations for battery metals. So more in there on the battery metals. Then Stephen Tao is going to speak to us about responsible sourcing across the tin supply chain. So Stephen is from the International Tin Association. Then we've got Murray Hitzman from ICRAG, who's going to speak to us about research for responsible and sustainable mineral exploration and production. Then Leave Carroll from Accenture is going to bring in the technology node. So how do we leverage technology for resource stewardship as a whole? Then we go to Cecilia Joffrey from Isometrics to talk about tools to measure environment, social governance from board to operations. And then we go to Vittoria Franconcini from CUMI, who talks more about the OEDC due diligence guidance. Of course, we already heard from the OEDC this morning, so that's really exciting. And then finally, we end up with a conversation between Bob, Jan, and you'll see their abstract up online talking about the talent gap and perhaps what kind of skill sets we need to be able to address some of the aspects we've been speaking about. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I shall let you all go and get your lunch, but hopefully see you all back again soon in a few hours' time, or sleep, Grant, or sleep. But thank you very, very much and see you all again soon. Thank you.